Now, one of the reasons why I'm not entirely sure is because of the pervasiveness and popularity of Amos Wilson's work, which almost everyone on the so-called black left, or in certainly nationalist circles, has read. He did, and this is why I readdressed it, try to clean it up for the second edition. Dr. Wilson did promote the Selig Center and buying power as something to be tooled within his analysis.
What books are you referencing?
Blueprint for Black Buying Power,
which was published after
Blueprint for Black Power.
Which was published and compiled again, after he
but it doesn't it doesn't matter when it was published. That's a fair point, but wait, it doesn't matter to my point. It doesn't matter. The point is how popular it is within these circles and how often it is referenced. It was almost singularly brought up to me every time for years before I put one word of print to this argument and I even read it myself. But years before now, so my point, and the only point I'm making is that the popularity of Wilson's work, regardless of when it was published, means that a lot of well-meaning people, Wilson himself, a well-meaning person, are mistaken by and misled by this misunderstanding of Selig. And if they promote it within their own work and in their own spaces, it makes sense to me. And it would also make sense that here comes Jared saying Wilson and others are wrong. People would just viscerally say Jared is a lunatic. That's why I keep saying to the minister, inviting the minister through whoever and Boyce directly to read the work and address themselves to my argument, and then see if they could still stand on that, or if they wouldn't, as I think Wilson would himself have said, you know what? On this point, Jared, I think you made a good point. I'm gonna make a slight adjustment and keep it moving. That's it.
So real quick. So before the book was posthumously published, and as we talked about before, even in Blueprint for Black Power, there's contradicting chapters, right? And there are lines where Amos literally say, I am not a trained economist. This is not literal advice. It's normally to facilitate discussion to deeper dive into it. And I'm going to continue the project, but we've gotten 3 or 4 episodes of following the economic advice that actually tanked, all of them. And so, again, I think I'm on more of Jared's point. I wouldn't so much challenge Amos, but like Bell Hooks, like anybody else, their followers are doing way more different with their work than they would even have done. And I think having a conversation with their followers to the point of their argument. So for instance, in Baltimore, it was hella effective when people talk about circling the black dollar. Okay, let's try this. You got $10, I got $10, we got $10. Let's circulate it and see what happens. I'm the only one with a business. Y'all don't got no business. Once we circulate it, at the end of the day, I'm gonna have $30. You're gonna have $0. You're gonna have $0. It's wealth built. And I think going through conversations like that with people is what it's really gonna take, because that's the level people at. People are not in a place. Again, I've had a conversation with Jabari, and I was using white hegemony a couple of times, and he was like, "What does that even mean?" And I was like, "Wait, I thought you read Amos. Like, this is where I learned it from." And if we're honest, people didn't read that book. That book is this thick. Nobody read that book. I'm gonna say nobody, but a lot of people didn't read that book. And a lot of people can't even tell you about chapters in the book. And so if we're being completely honest, and I was talking about this backstage with Jared, the University of Kemet Press, they got 30 books, and some of them over 1,000 pages. And everybody I engaged, nobody read any of the books. And Diallo, you said you had a couple books you didn't get into yet. But like, so if there's a perception of the idea of the leaders, then people really not following anything that they say. They just follow. They're emotionally connected to the leaders or their demagogues, which me, you, and Asafo had a talk about that. And we just need to figure out a different way to engage followers that are emotionally connected to personalities, just like we talked about the after party concept. the personality and people, like we got to find a way not to argue with that, because as Jared said, people just gonna shut down. Like nobody know what your dad might be the perfect person in the world, but in the community, this is how he's showing up. And if you're not really focused on his behaviors and conclusions, then you're gonna lose a lot of people before you start talking.
Well, as I would say with Amos Wilson, that book he had given a couple of talks before he passed and said that that was a work in progress. And after he died, some of the people he worked with compiled that book and put it out. But if you go back and you want to talk about solutions advocated by him in life that he had a chance to lecture on, debate, and accept scrutiny about and respond to the scrutiny. If you look at the falsification of African consciousness, Black self-annihilation in service to white supremacy, Black on Black crime. When you talk about his solutions, I mean, he was vehemently anti-capitalist. He was advocating for much more. He was advocating for ideological and cultural radicalization and transformation above all. And he even understood that regardless of how much money we get, if we don't have a different ideology, if we don't have a different worldview, if we don't establish some different hierarchies and social relationships, it's all moot. So to whittle Amos Wilson down to Black buying power, or him suggesting that if we spend our money more wisely, things would be solved, is an absolute.
But again, let's be careful, because that's not what I'm doing.
It's an absolute misrepresentation of who he is, regardless of if he has a bunch of acolytes running around here saying that he gave them permission to advocate for or engage in the myth of Black buying power. So
I just want to be clear again, that's not what I'm doing. And what the point that I made, because again, I think, Diallo, you're missing it. Even in your defense of Wilson there, you're missing it. Your correct defense of Wilson. My point wasn't to analyze Wilson or his work. My point was to talk about, again, look at what my argument is. What are the sources for the origin and dispensation and distribution of this mythology?
It's not Amos Wilson.
It absolutely is when it comes to Black buying power.
Back 100 years. Listen. Carlos Cooks was doing buy Black 100 years ago.
So Diallo, two things. Diallo, two things. One, you're going to have to not interrupt me and let me finish my point. I listened to you and I wrote notes and I waited my time. You're going to have to, one, let me finish. And two, you said you read my book. I sent it to you. I signed a copy for you and sent it to you. You said you read it. Do me the honor of paying attention to the argument. Because the point of me referencing Wilson in the book and here is not to blame or condemn him. It is to point specifically to how the mythology of buying power gets distributed to Black communities. And as I said in the book, accurately, Wilson, not because he was a fraud, not because he was wrong anywhere else, not because he was bad, and not because he's in the category you want to put Farrakhan in, but because of Wilson's, as I said, and I'll pull it up here if we need to quote from it directly. But as I said, because of his hard work and dedication to African people, he was so committed to tracking down any and every opportunity and possibility for Black people to get free that he picked up this Selig Center report when it first came out. He was among the first to do it, and he misunderstood it. And he, by putting it into his broader analysis that we just all sat here and agreed no one fully reads or fully wants to pay attention to, because he did that and was so popular and committed and deeply ingrained and involved in Black communities, he carried that, and his work posthumously carries that into the community. And to the extent that Black people do read his work or pay attention to him, they have absolutely picked up on that part of the mythology. That's why I took a moment in my work to show where he got it wrong, how he misunderstood it, and to isolate it only to that point. I'm not saying he's wrong anywhere else. So I'm not saying again. So you got to be clear about both what you're arguing and then what you're saying I'm arguing, and the two are not the same. And you misrepresented my point there, and I don't want that to be unclear, because that has caused problems for me in certain spaces, because I will go everywhere and talk to everybody who wants to hear me talk about this work. And Black people who need to hear this argument are very much committed to Wilson and have misunderstood this point. So when people want to misrepresent me, as has often happened and a little bit here today, that I'm condemning Wilson and challenging Wilson's broader argument, that misses everything that I'm saying. So please.
So
okay.
Real quick. So I think, again, when you go back to the audience and the audience laser focus on the word. So even when you think about John Henry Clark's lectures, and they're long, right? There was one time that he said something about Black people need to not wear underwear or something like that until other Black people make the underwear. And we need to make our own.
He said no African leader should buy a car until the African people he's serving have built it themselves. So that was his point. He said, don't be buying Mercedes and BMWs and stuff like that.
No, that's not what he said. Wait. He said, let me just accurately say, he speculated. He said, what would happen if Farrakhan said, or one of our great leaders stood up and said, I'm not going to wear a pair of underwear unless we make the underwear. And he said, and people don't want to see their minister walking around with no drawers. He speculated. He never said this was a solution. He was just speculating. And that was a criticism of the misleadership class.
Let's stay there.
Influence. It wasn't talking about underwear being a solution.
My point of bringing that up, right, is a Black entrepreneurial person who listened to that line is going to only think and only focus on that line.
How do you know that?
Huh? You said, how do I know
How do you know what a person's going to do?
I mean, we could,
I said, he was talking about the misuse of their power. They have power and influence over the community, and they orient us towards nonsense as opposed to motivating and orienting us to expend our resources and talent in more effective and useful ways.
Diallo, there's no such thing as the mass propaganda of entrepreneurship within the Black community.
We don't have to misrepresent what he was saying and what he was advocating.
I'm not misrepresenting. I'm telling you what people are going to focus on. Just like people didn't read the whole damn book of Amos, people not listen to the whole lectures of these people. They literally go in there to hit it. That's why we in the age where clips are the thing. TikTok videos and Instagram videos, and you have the small clip. And that's what people are focusing on. And so when they argue and say, well, even Amos Wilson or John Henry Clark, whoever said this, that's actually what they're doing. And they're not even dealing with the larger thing. We still have people think what I have a dream speech is just that. That's just a tagline, not everything else he said. So what I'm saying is folks are only focused on the things that helps them achieve what they're doing. And is what we call proof texting, which same thing we talk about preachers do, or people who are against the Bible. They take one thing and they use this to propel their argument. And with the surety that nobody actually who's listening is going to examine their argument, examine the whole context of the thing. That's what I'm arguing. I'm not saying I misrepresent what John Henry Clark said. And then the last point, even when I talked about Amos Q&A at the end, and I can't find it, but there was a sister who pressed him about capitalism and talked about socialism. And he said, you know what, to be honest, I don't know. I'm just tired of losing. I don't want to be on the bottom anymore. And he said, I'm still trying to figure that out. So he's literally telling you, like, economics is not his thing. He does, and so I think somebody said in the chat that he was anti-communist. I don't remember hearing that, but I'm pretty sure he will admit that he just doesn't. That's not his thing. He's a psychologist. You talk about Black child psychology, he got you. You talk about Black on Black violence, he got you. But when you start talking about economics, that's not his bag. And so I think it's more of our problem of saying that, okay, if this person has, even with Umar, you got this specialty on this thing. But now everything that Umar say is just fact. He might can know the ADHD conversation or whatever, maybe, but everything else is just not his bag. And I think we need to be comfortable with realizing that these people who are a specialty in one area, that don't mean they know a bunch of everything. And even the thing that they're coherent in, they need to be challenged as well. And I think we have a problem with challenging demagogues or whoever, these ideal of superheroes that we have.
Yeah. I do think we have a problem with challenging people of stature and status, but I appreciate that you clarified what he was saying. But in terms of expertise, it's even to go to Michael Parenti's assessment, or there's another, or the disciplined mind philosophy, where the experts, many of the experts are kind of like Pied Pipers for the status quo. Many economists, there are some really good economists, as someone mentioned, Dr. Linwood Tahi. There were many good economists and economic thinkers who do advocate and tell the truth about economics, but a large majority of economists are priests of capitalism. You know, and when I was at UMKC, where Dr. Tahi came out of their economic school, and I was political science, but I had to take a course in micro and macroeconomics, and where the professor there was like, you know, economists are either bean counters or priest. You know, they either just get caught up in the formulas and the technicality of economics, or they just get caught up in advocating for the end of history type. It's not the perfect system, but it's the only one available to us. It's the only realistic way to structure, where very few of them break from that mode. So just as you say, where I greatly value and I've greatly benefited personally from scholars and academics, but they are not above critique and dissection and challenging when what they present to us is either doesn't work for us, or what they present to us is inconsistent with what we understand to be true or factual.
See, that's my point. That's always been my point. Somewhat, what I'm teasing out of what both of you have just said. What I think I've known about Dr. Wilson is that if he were here, he would have received the work and the argument and addressed himself to it and made an adjustment, or found an argument that he would have laid out in his own way that showed where I was wrong.
I know this for
I
a
have
fact.
I have no doubts in my mind about that. That's why and in my experience with his work, like I've read several of his books, including Blueprint, page cover to cover, repeatedly, subsections of it many times.
It's weakest
had
book.
The pleasure, I'm just saying, I'm saying read several others. I even used Falsification of African Consciousness for a speech exam for years at Morgan. But my point is, I even had the pleasure of co-teaching portions of Blueprint in Dr. Turner's class. So like I'm confident with what I'm saying about his work and how I think he, you know, and why I'm not condemning him beyond that one error. Again, George Jackson is the only one that I've come across in terms of luminaries who was 100% correct on this issue. The only one. And he did it in one line, just saying they say we have buying power, and then they inflate the cost of everything, making it moot.